What is up, everyone? Welcome into another edition of our NBA DFS DraftKings Picks videos. I'm your host, Justin Bales, and this video is for December 19th, obviously a Sunday. We have a surprisingly large, I believe, 9-game slate, which usually just doesn't happen all that often on Sundays. It's a 6 p.m. start, but a lot to go over. Before we get into it, I do want to discuss one more thing. In the last video, we kind of talked about how COVID is changing everything in the NBA at the moment. And since teams are really shorthanded, they're playing guys really big minutes and they're not necessarily ruling them out the next game. So it's something to be aware of. The big one that happened obviously last night would be Drew Holiday. Massive minutes, massive role in the offense the night prior. Then he wasn't listed as out or anything for last night. And then obviously he just didn't draw the start, didn't play. So really, you should be looking at starting lineups. You should be weighing what you can and can't do, essentially, in terms of pivoting off of someone. I know for tonight, one of the big ones is going to be Patty Mills and Blake Griffin. I don't necessarily know if Brooklyn is planning on ruling them out for rest, if they're just going to say that they're healthy and leave them active, not give them any minutes, if they're going to actually just completely play them again. But two older players that I believe played roughly 40 minutes last night. And this is just kind of the situation that we've gotten into with teams being shorthanded, teams having, veteran players that they don't necessarily want to play a ridiculous amount of minutes, but in some games they have to. Other games, they just give them time off, and they need the bodies technically to be able to play the game. So they don't rule them out, but they just don't give them minutes. So definitely something to be aware of. I do believe that will help. It's going to be a big thing essentially for after lock, especially if it's a later game. Like Milwaukee last night was the only 9 p.m. game. It was the latest game on the slate. So obviously lock had happened for quite some time before the Bucks announced that Drew Holiday wasn't starting. And then you had to just kind of maneuver your way around it. And there wasn't all that much to do. So just something to be aware of moving forward, especially as, the COVID outbreak kind of gets worse. Really, that's what it seems is happening at the moment. So I did want to quick outline that before we get into this slate. But as always, if you enjoy the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. You can subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos, and comment any comments or questions you have below. I will be in throughout the day to answer them to the best of my abilities. That is for anything that you need to know, strategy, anything that I personally do in terms of DFS, or anything of that sort, just players that you would like to know about, anything that you can really think of, just go ahead, comment it below. I will respond throughout the day to that. Anything else before we get in? I think we're more or less all set. I guess the only other thing would be chatdfs.com gets you into our free Discord where we go over all of the injury news and everything all throughout the day. We discuss, the plays that open up because of injuries, all that good stuff. dfskarma.com for all of our free content. We also have premium content that you can get with our core plays package that also gets you our projections, our core plays, and our premium Discord, which is essentially, you can get into our free Discord, and then the premium Discord just opens up a few extra chats for you as well. Those are kind of what we sit in right before lock and everything. But that about does it. We can get into the injury news, which, once again, I apologize, 9-game slate. There is a ridiculous amount to go over. So we will just kind of break this down and go over the injury news for each game before we get into the position by position. Portland, Memphis, CJ McCollum and Cody Zeller both will continue to miss time. Zaire Williams, Santi Aldama, Sam Morril, John Morant, and Brandon Clark have all been ruled out for tonight for Memphis. San Antonio, Sacramento, you have De'Aaron Fox, Davion Mitchell, Terrence Davis, Lewis King, Marvin Bagley, and Alex Len all out for Sacramento. Rashawn Holmes is questionable for tonight. Miami, they will continue to miss Caleb Martin, Markieff Morris, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, all out. Marcus Garrett and Tyler Hero, both questionable. Jeremy Grant, obviously, still out for Detroit on the other side of that game. For Denver, you have Bol, who's going to continue to miss time. And then J. Michael Green is doubtful for tonight. We have a ridiculous amount for Brooklyn. So everything for Brooklyn here. Kevin Durant, Paul Millsap, DeAndre Bembry, LaMarcus Aldridge, James Harden, James Johnson, Javon Carter, Bruce Brown, all out. Blake Griffin, Nick Claxton, and Patty Mills all questionable. I believe Blake Griffin and Patty Mills are solely questionable because it's the rest on a back-to-back. Nick Claxton is dealing with, I believe, a wrist injury. So he seems more likely to play in that scenario if they are just opting to bench Patty Mills and Blake Griffin. Cleveland, Atlanta, Evan Mobley and Isaac Okoro will both miss time last night. Lamar Stevens actually drew the start for Okoro, so he likely will draw a start again, but nothing is guaranteed. They could really change a bunch of their lineup. It doesn't really matter necessarily either. On the other side, Bogdan Bogdanovic and Trae Young are both questionable for Atlanta. So obviously, Trae Young is the one that will change the slate, but Bogdanovic, does open up some value as well. Abdel Nader already ruled out for Phoenix, while Devin Booker is finally questionable. Willie Cauley-Stein, Frank Ntilikina, and Josh Green all out for Dallas. The other guys that will continue to miss time, obviously Luka Doncic and Reggie Bullock. On the other side, Anthony Edwards and Taurean Prince both out for Minnesota. Furkan Korkmaz, Jaden Springer, and Georges Niang all out for Philly. Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid. Once again, slate changers are questionable for Philadelphia, specifically Embiid, similar to Trae Young, would essentially change the entire slate if he is ruled out. For Los Angeles, it looks like LeBron James will play. Dwight Howard, Avery Bradley, Taylor Horton Tucker, Austin Reeves, and Malik Monk have all already been ruled out. And then you have Trevor Ariza, who is questionable. On the opposite side, Ayo Dosunmu, Zach LaVine, Troy Brown Jr., Elise Johnson, all ruled out. Matt Thomas is doubtful, and Derek Jones Jr. is questionable. You do have Javonte Green, DeMar DeRozan, and Kobe White, who have all already been ruled in for Chicago as well. So that does it with the injury news. I know that is essentially just a ridiculous amount to go over. It's kind of crazy how the NBA has hit this point. But here we are. Now it's time to go over the slate. I will say I'm going to try to keep my recommendations at each position relatively concise. I was going to say short, but that makes it sound like the recommendation itself is short. I just mean very few. If you have any questions about any specific players, go ahead and drop them in the comments because there are a bunch more guys that I'm going to be willing to play on this slate, especially as it shakes out a little bit more. Obviously, this was recorded the night before, but these are a few plays at each position that I do like and did want to go over. At point guard, I think if you're at the top, for me, it has to be DeJounte Murray. Obviously gets the matchup against Sacramento, which is more or less a new team at this point because so many guys are out. But they don't really have anyone that's going to slow him down. He obviously comes with plenty of triple-double potential. When he's deciding he wants to take over a game offensively, he does come with quite a bit of scoring upside as well. And when you kind of look at what he's been doing, he's been a little bit more inconsistent in recent games, but it's dropped his price down a little bit. Scored almost 50 fantasy points in his only matchup against the Kings this season and really didn't come all that close to triple doubling. He just essentially was a scorer in that game. So when you look at his ability with, 2 triple doubles in his last 3 games, then obviously if he boasts 20 plus real point potential, a lot of upside to like in DeJounte Murray, especially in this type of a matchup. As you move down a little bit more, I think the guy that sticks out, and there are a lot of options right around this price tag that I like, but the guy that I do want to outline right now would be Lonzo Ball. Should take on a larger role in the offense. Obviously, DeMar DeRozan's back, and he's going to play a relatively big role, but Zach LaVine leaves quite a bit open there. And when you look at what Ball's been doing prior, roughly 40 minutes in 4 consecutive games. He's really, really flashed in those games. He is taking a ton of 3-point shots. He's actually hitting them very well as well. Scoring well. We know that he comes with triple-double upside. He's a guy that can contribute in each of the 5 categories. So Lonzo Ball for under 8,000, really good option. You get the narrative too, where he's playing against his former team. When you look at what he did to them earlier in the season, 27 points. He shot 10 of 13 from the field, 7 rebounds, 8 assists, 2 steals. Over 50 fantasy points in that game. He's still under 8,000, as I said. And, obviously the Lakers just really struggle against versatile guards anyway. So just kind of the perfect matchup for a guy like Lonzo. And I do believe that, he more or less makes an outstanding option in all leagues. I just don't necessarily know if I'm going to have to really, or if I'll be able to get to him in cash games, just the way that the slate's likely to break down tomorrow at some point because there's so many games. If you need a bit of salary relief, Ricky Rubio is going to take on a larger role with Isaac Okoro and Evan Mobley out. I do think that Rubio is a really good option. Plays with the ball in his hands a lot, really good in terms of assists. He can score. He's kind of flashed that. And he can add steals and rebounds as well. So a lot of different ways for Rubio to score fantasy points. He's still only 5,100. Only matchup against Atlanta this season. He dropped 45 fantasy points, 35 minutes. So really good spot for him. I don't necessarily see him playing 35 minutes again. I wouldn't necessarily be shocked if he did. But Rubio at 5,100, I don't think that he really needs that. And he is one of the better options. Sticking with that game, as we move to shooting guard, Darius Garland is still under 8,000. He's been really, really good in terms of scoring when Evan Mobley is out. I believe he scored 19 plus in every game. Depending on last night, obviously I'm recording this while he's playing, but generally sits above 20 points. He's scored over 21 in 4 of the 5 prior to last night. And obviously he's going to continue to be a very high upside option with Evan Mobley out. Now, the reason Rubio played so many minutes in the first game is because Garland didn't play. I don't necessarily think that Garland's going to completely take away from them, and I think that they can find success together, especially if you're looking at Garland as more or less a pure scorer versus kind of the versatile, needing the ball in his hands type of player, where Rubio can actually get the assist to Garland, which they do quite often. For each ceiling, though, they kind of need the ball in their hands just based on the way they play. I'm not specifically talking that you should be pairing them in GPPs or anything. I just think that both of the players have the capability to find success together while on the floor. So that's something that I likely end up attacking on the slate. If you move down more, Cam Thomas is 5,200. The price is getting up there, but he shot 7 of 20 last night, 20 shot attempts for him. He's the type of player, a rookie that isn't afraid to try to score the ball. That's what he does. He can add other stats as well, which is good. But when you really look at the type of offense that Brooklyn's going to be running, especially if they don't have Patty Mills or Blake Griffin, who can be more ball dominant as veterans, Cam Thomas is going to be one of the guys that really tries to take the game over. 5,200 isn't a salary that, it's getting up there and, way too high or anything for what he's doing, because if he catches fire, he comes with significantly more upside. So I do believe that he's a reasonable option. 5,200 against Denver. Not really overly concerned with the matchup or anything. They've given up some big games to guards. So Cam Thomas is a really solid option for Brooklyn there. And then I guess we should talk about Kobe White. He's returning. I don't necessarily know what Chicago's going to do with his minutes. He obviously was out for the beginning of the season. He's only played in, I believe, 9 games to start the season. And I don't think that he's played more than 25 minutes in any of the games. The big issue is Kobe White is 3,500, so he doesn't need more than 25 minutes to hit value at his current price. Especially with Zach LaVine out, White's the type of player that has the ability in terms of scoring to take the game over. I wouldn't be overly shocked if he tries to do that. And, if he's getting 30 plus minutes, just based on the fact that they don't have anyone else to play, he's going to be a lock in all leagues. I just haven't heard word at this point, and I do think that we kind of need to wait to see what's happening with that before we make any decisions on him. Moving along, small forward eligible, Brandon Ingram's locked into big minutes. He's playing a massive role. He gets the matchup against the Philadelphia 76ers, who obviously passed on him during his draft. So I do think that Brandon Ingram is in play, not specifically because of the narrative, but it could add a little extra juice. When you look at what he did in their only matchup this season, scored 25 points, added 7 rebounds, 6 assists, over 40 fantasy points. Now, obviously, he's expensive at 8,900, but Ingram's also been playing extremely well in recent games. I do think that he's the player that's going to take over the game for New Orleans. And at 8,900, he hasn't really priced himself out yet, especially because we know that he has 60 fantasy point upside. So I do think if you're spending more towards the top of small forward, Brandon Ingram is one of the better options. I also wanted to say LeBron James, but I think that for the price tag, I likely prefer Ingram. As you move down a little bit more, there's a few options that definitely make sense. The one that sticks out the most to me, specifically for the matchup, would probably be Dylan Brooks. He's finally caught fire. He scored 20 plus real life points in 5 of his last 6. In the one that he didn't, he scored 15, still scored almost 30 fantasy points in that game. Really safe for 6,300, comes with 40 plus fantasy point upside, locked into the big minutes, gets a really good matchup against Portland. I wouldn't be shocked if he drops 20 plus points once again. So at 6,300, knowing that he probably plays quite a bit of small forward in this game, which is a position that Portland really struggles with, Dylan Brooks is one of the better options, or I guess at worst, he's one of the safer options. We can say that. And then we kind of move down to, the Brooklyn guys as you start to get to the salary relief options. David Duke coming off a monster game again last night, performed really well 2 games ago, then obviously had the 15 fantasy point dud in between them, up to 5,000, but similar to Cam Thomas. He's starting, he's playing big minutes. There's only so much that, you can really go, even if you don't think he's talented, as long as the minutes are there and, he's at least producing relatively well. At 5K, you can take the shot on him. At 4,800, right below him, you have Kessler Edwards, who's locked into big minutes. Edwards looked really good in the G League. In his first game, he scored nearly 40 fantasy points in 44 minutes for Brooklyn. Then, similar to Duke, he kind of dropped down only 23 fantasy points, which isn't even that bad for 4,800. And then last night, he played significantly better. So I do think that both of them really are in play. They make really good options because they're not overly expensive at this point. There's not all that much, I guess, that they can do to burn you in terms of fantasy because they're so cheap, 5K and 4,800. So I do think that both of them are really solid options. And then as you drop down a little bit more, Nasir Little is playing big minutes. I do like him. Doesn't always produce, which is kind of an issue. I think that at 4,300, he's viable. He gets a solid matchup against Memphis. He just posted 21 fantasy points in 35 minutes against them and really wasn't, I guess he doesn't generally attack offensively, but he didn't add all that much in terms of the peripheral stats that we know that he can. In his last game, scored almost 30. He's still only 4,300, so the upside's clearly there. That's not likely somewhere that I'm going in cash games, but I do think in tournaments it makes sense to at least consider him. At the top of power forward, I guess it's important to mention that Anthony Davis is out a few weeks as well. Generally, I don't say players that are out for an extended period of time, but Anthony Davis, I think last night he just got ruled out for a few weeks. So important to note that. And, that's another reason to really like LeBron James. You can add Russell Westbrook into that. But at the top of power forward, I think you're likely just deciding between DeMar DeRozan, who luckily they did price up, and Kristaps Porzingis without Luka. Porzingis, just consistently performing very well without Luka on the floor. DeRozan likely takes over the Chicago offense with no Zach LaVine. So both of them really good options. I'm not even slightly worried about the matchup against Los Angeles. Porzingis, on the other hand, gets a really good matchup against Minnesota, who struggles against center. Obviously, Porzingis moves back and forth between power forward and center. I probably would like him even more if I knew that he was going to get, even more center minutes because Minnesota is relatively good against power forwards. But regardless, the usage is there, the minutes are there, the volume's there. So I do think that both of them really are in play for the type of matchups that they're in. The more you move down, I think it's obvious that you play Blake Griffin if he's starting and going to play the 30 plus minutes. I think the big issue is that you have absolutely no clue, especially the night before, whether that's going to be the case or not. That's a big problem. I think that it's important to at least note him. He's been consistently scoring 30 plus fantasy points. He's still under 6,000. I don't just necessarily want to assume completely that he's going to be out. If I had to guess, I would think that he's likely out of this game because his body just hasn't aged overly well. I don't know how else to put that. And it's not likely that, he's going to play minutes in the 40s and then the next night come out and dominate or anything. But if he's in the starting lineup, I do think that he's a very viable option. Good play there. As you move down, I think you have to essentially consider Carmelo Anthony at 4,200. He should take on bigger minutes with Anthony Davis out. He should take on a larger role. And if that's the case, 4,200 is a little bit too cheap for the way that he can score. So Carmelo Anthony is probably the preferred option down here. I also think that Herbert Jones is an interesting play just because of his pure upside. Doesn't really consistently produce for New Orleans, but when he's on, he does perform really well. He can add blocks, steals. If his shot's falling, he scored 17 in his last game, 9 rebounds, 4 assists. So it's kind of all there. He just doesn't consistently put it all together. So I think that he's reasonable, but Carmelo Anthony, especially if he moves into the starting lineup, is probably the preferred option there. At center, I think you obviously start with Nikola Jokic. Gets the matchup against Brooklyn. They have no one. If Nicholas Claxton's healthy and starting, he's going to get plenty of time against Claxton, who very clearly is not going to defend him. If Claxton's out, they literally have basically no bigs. He probably gets quite a bit of time against Daron Sharp, rookie who I actually do like from North Carolina, but you're not going to slow down Nikola Jokic at this point in his career. 26 minutes in his last game, he finally struggled. It was a bit of a blowout against Atlanta. He still scored 50 fantasy points. So that's kind of where you're sitting at for the floor. Whereas he's also scored 70 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 6. He scored 60 plus in 5 of those. So pretty clear that Nikola Jokic is the top center option. I think that there are plenty of other plays. It's tough to kind of narrow them down. There's a lot of really, really good plays right around the same price tag where they all come with plenty of upside, and it kind of depends on what's happening in the slate. I think that Jared Allen is 100% viable. DeAndre Ayton gets the matchup against Charlotte. Absolutely love the matchup. He's great. If Joel Embiid is out, Jonas Valanciunas is only 8,000, and he'll get the matchup against Andre Drummond, who's not going to be able to slow him down. As you continue, Clint Capella, Yusuf Nurkic, all of them are really, really good options. There's no lack of plays at center tonight. You have Jakob Poeltl against Sacramento, who really struggles against centers. It's really tough. If Rashawn Holmes is playing, he gets the matchup against San Antonio on the opposite side, where I don't have any issues with that. I just need to know that he's going to play the 30 plus minutes. And then as you continue to move down, you have guys like PJ Tucker, who's locked into the big minutes and has actually been playing relatively well, which continues to be, kind of shocking. But as long as he's playing well, it's tough at least to completely ignore him on this type of a slate. So a lot of options that I didn't necessarily give you a very solidified response as to who I'm looking at, or as to who I want at center. Those are all guys that I'm looking at. Throughout the day, I'll probably be moving guys up, moving guys down. If I had to pick right now, I think Jokic is number 1. In the next tier, Ayton is probably my favorite. And then in the next tier after that, it's probably Jakob Poeltl. I doubt that I move down. I do think that there are options to consider just based on guys getting minutes, guys having at least solid upside, and the matchups that they're in. Someone like Jared Vanderbilt, who gets a matchup against Dallas, who struggles with rebounding. Really good option there. I do think at the top of center as well, though, Karl Anthony Towns for under 10,000 is a really good option against Dallas as well. Center's probably the most loaded position on the slate. But I mean, there's plays everywhere. There's salary relief options everywhere. There's high priced guys at most positions as well. So hopefully that helps out a little bit. Again, if you have any questions or anything, drop them in the comments. I will answer them. If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and give us a thumbs up. We appreciate you watching, especially during this weird time with the NBA where stuff's changing and shifting so much. But good luck tonight. Hopefully everyone has a very good Sunday slate, and we'll be back on Monday.